Tell your children not to walk my way. Tell your children not to hear my words, what they mean, what they say. Mother, Mother, can you keep them in the dark for a while? Can you have them from the wedding?
And this is the video that I said I was going to do in my video on my other channel about comic books. As the title says, this is Confessions of a Comic Book Geek. I'm just going to talk a little bit about comics. I've only got 10 minutes, so we'll see how long this goes, and kind of how I became a comic book fan and all that sort of thing. Because since I continually keep bringing up comic books, a lot of people have asked, you know, kind of just random stuff about comics and that sort of thing. So I thought I would answer some of those, not so much answer those questions, but just kind of, you know, say a little bit about my history with comics. I started reading comics when I was 13. My mother, my late mother, God bless her soul, as I've said before, I've had very, 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 very harsh or very bad case of dyslexia, and to the point where, and back when I was in school, particularly when I was in grade school, and like first, second grade, and you're trying to learn to read, they knew a whole lot more about dyslexia than they knew like the generation before, but they still only knew maybe about like that much compared to what they know now. And my mother read up on a lot of stuff. My mother did a lot of things, and she actually did a lot of things that were right. And one of the things that she was right, because it was huge at the time, and this will lead to something, was huge into Star Wars. She bought me a lot of, not Star Wars comics, but a lot of the Star Wars books with tape. And then, but by the time I was like, I guess about 8, maybe even 6, or I guess I was about 8, 9 years old, they stopped making those. And so I just didn't read anything anymore, because there was nothing that really caught my eye. Well, when I was 13, my mother took my brother to, I believe it was Toys R Us, and when she came back, she had brought me a pack of comics that she had bought, and they still, I think they still do. I think I've seen them at some stores where they sell older comics like in a pack of like 6 or so, and it's the same thing except it was all G.I. Joe comics, because I was very big into G.I. Joe. I always loved G.I. Joe, and still do, for that matter. And so I started reading the G.I. Joe comics, and a lot of people have always kind of been, they're G.I. Joe comics, but if you go back and actually read them, and now they're out in trades, they are actually very good, and particularly probably starting about issue 20, where Snake Eyes actually starts talking. Yes, Snake Eyes talks in the comic book. The comic book is very different from the cartoon. Not very different, but it is different. It got really good to about issue 100, and then it started kind of falling off a little bit. But it was really good, and through that, when I started actually reading the series and got caught up, there was ads at the time for the X-Men event at the time, which was, yes, for those of you that think events are just a new thing, no, was Inferno, which had these really cool ads in it, these really cool art, and so I was like, oh, that looks really cool. So when that came out, I started reading that, and then through that, I started reading Amazing Spider-Man, and everything just kind of bloomed from there. So I've read a lot. Through that, I became a huge X-Men fan up until Grant Morrison started New X-Men, which I have not read a regular X-Men book since then. I've read Ultimate X-Men, but I've not read regular X-Men stuff since then, with the exception of House of M, which was awesome, but it's not really, you know, not really the same, because to me, that book, never mind. Maybe I'll go on a rant on that another time. But anyways, and also about that time, you also had, even before that, you had the whole Image thing, which kind of made me very cynical about comics, because you had all of these guys that I liked as far as artists, but when Image started, very few of the books had really good writers. And Spawn started out really well, but by the time I got to about issue 20, I would say it got really bad. And then you had Wildstorm. Wildstorm probably had the best overall books. Then you had Top Cow. Top Cow had a lot of TNA books, but they also had Cyberforce, which of of the original Image books, that was probably my favorite, with the exception of, yeah, that was probably my favorite. That was my favorite of the books. So you had that, and then as time went on, I started getting into more and more stuff. I was always a little bit more into, like, because Dark Horse, because Dark Horse had Aliens and the Predator comics and stuff like that. And I was also really into the Terminator comics, which were done by, I can't remember who did the Terminator comics back then. They were done by one company, and then Dark Horse wound up taking them over, and I think someone else has them now. And stuff like that. I was never, there was a lot of mainstream stuff I didn't read, and I was never really big into DC stuff, with the exception of Batman. And the only time I was really big into Batman was when Chuck Dixon was writing Batman. So you had all of that, and every time I would seem to get into an artist, always bad things would happen, and they would wind up doing other things. Joe Mad, Stephen Platt, stuff like that would happen, where they would just go off and do other things. And I like really good writers, I also like really good artists too. And so that's kind of just how everything just kind of happened. Over the last, probably the books that I've read the most that are still out there, continually read, are Fables. And you ever bring up Fables, usually people bring up Why the Last Man. I did read Why the Last Man, probably to about issue 25 maybe, and then I just kind of gave up on it because it just wasn't my cup of tea. Also Astro City. I love Astro City. Astro City to me is you read Astro City and you're like, Kirby Busiek should write every superhero comic ever. And currently, let's see, Invincible, really good comic. I'm sure most of you probably read that. The new Ultimate Spider-Man, I really like that, even though I'm sure a lot of people probably don't. Witchblade, which when Witchblade started, I hated Witchblade, but then Ron Mars has now taken over, or Mars has taken over, and now there's a new artist, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce the guy's name, who does these beautiful paintings, painted art, which is just amazing. And then you add Ron Mars's really good stories, and it just turns into, if you're not reading it, I would definitely recommend checking it out, because it's really good stuff. Almost any of the Hellboy stuff. I'm also really big into Garth Ennis, though I don't read any of his Punisher stuff, because I've never just been into that. I'm not Punisher related in the character I've always liked. But I have been reading The Boys, which is another superhero comic. His kind of take on superheroes, which is very dark, very gritty. Not definitely for everyone. If you know who Garth Ennis is, it's very much Garth Ennis being Garth Ennis. Irredeemable, which is kind of Superman type character going completely gonzo evil, and then its sister book, Incorruptible, which is kind of a bad guy turning good because he thinks he has to kind of balance good and evil, because the best good guy just became evil, which is really good too. And there's a bunch of other stuff, but I'm kind of running out of time, so that's pretty much it. Like I said, there's lots of stuff I read. I read a whole ton of stuff, and out of everything that I'm currently reading, without a doubt, Irredeemable and Astro City. I'm a big Astro City fan. And really Witchblade, which is kind of surprising, but Witchblade is a really good blend of really good art and actually amazing art and a really good story, which to me is something that comic books overall are kind of missing. But that's kind of that. I hope I answered some of your guys' questions that had anything else. If you want anything else, feel free to ask, and that sort of thing. So I'm sure some people will ask what I hate about Grant Morrison so much, but hey, I'm sure that will happen. With that, I'm out. Have a good one, and later.